Hey everybody, it's Yoli Medina. So I'm going to be talking about the Brian Kohberger case again. And this time I'm going to be talking about the motion in limine that was brought by the state to exclude Brian's medical records regarding his neuropsychological and medical conditions. And in case anybody's not familiar with this case, this is a case of 4 students who were unalived brutally on November 13th, 2022. The state brought a motion to exclude certain medical records that the defense brought and produced as in discovery. They produced it, and so they want to introduce those medical records along with expert testimony that Brian Kohberger has autism spectrum disorder, among other things. He has OCD and developmental coordination disorder. And so the hearing was today, and I made a previous video on this where I wasn't sure what was going to happen because there is no law regarding the explanation to the jury about a person on the autism spectrum. And so the hearing came on today, and I was actually surprised. The judge was very sympathetic to me with regard to this issue. And he basically acknowledged that there is no law that would allow an instruction that Brian Kohberger has autism or he's on the autism spectrum disorder and, give a description of his behaviors so that the jury could understand if those behaviors were exhibited during the trial while he's sitting at counsel table. And the reason why there's no law on that is because the jury is not supposed to take into consideration anything outside of what comes from the witness stand and any documents that are produced that are admitted into evidence. So this is a novel issue, and I was very interested in this. And I thought the judge might be not too happy with it because Mr. Kohberger, like today, he sat through an 8-hour-long hearings with, the motions in limine where they talked about evidence, and he just sat there. There was nothing abnormal about him. And the judge made reference to that. He said, well, I've seen him, and he doesn't exhibit any visible signs that you would need to explain to the jury in the guilty phase, meaning before the mitigation phase. So if he's found guilty, then the mitigation phase comes, and that's where this type of information or evidence about him being on the autism spectrum would come in. It would come in as a mitigating factor, and that's what the defense was arguing, that on one of the motions, they were arguing that it shouldn't be an aggravating factor. It should be a mitigating factor, that he's on the autism spectrum, that he has obsessive compulsive disorder, and that he has this developmental coordination disorder. So the judge, when this motion in limine to exclude medical records and testimony regarding Brian Kohberger's disorders, he said what I thought he would say, which is the jury is only supposed to take into consideration what comes from the witness stand, not anything else. And so, and he also said, it seems like you're arguing out of both sides of your mouth, because on the one hand, you want autism to be a mitigating factor because it's a mental disorder or a psychiatric disorder or medical condition. And on the other hand, you want to be able to instruct the jury that this is not a medical condition, or this is not a mental condition. This is a neurological medical condition. And so he wanted clarification regarding that, and that's fair. And the attorney, Elizabeth Massoff, I think, she argued it very well. I expected some pushback from the judge more than what he did. And he actually, after the attorney argued various law that was out of state it's persuasive law. It's not controlling. There is no controlling law in Idaho that would allow some kind of instruction to explain Brian Kohberger's strange behaviors. Now, I personally haven't seen those strange behaviors. I've only seen him when he is stopped by the police officers during the, I guess, 3 traffic stops that I'm aware of that are available. And to me, he just looks like a person that got stopped by the cops and maybe is trying to get out of a ticket. I don't know. I'm nervous when I get stopped by a cop. Yeah, I mean, I didn't find anything strange necessarily about him, but that's the only time I've ever seen him interact with somebody. Okay. Because he has not said a word in terms of this case or any of the allegations against him. And so he's just, there's nothing to gauge anything on because he's just very quiet and doesn't say anything and just sits there. So the judge, he took into consideration that there is other law, and he said that's not controlling in Idaho. And the defense attorney made a good argument and said, this is a case of first impression. And she's making it this argument because of an appeal. And, I think he listened to her and he was sort of compassionate. I mean, in terms of he wasn't downplaying it. He wasn't saying, oh, come on, he's been sitting here during these hearings and I haven't seen anything. So what are you trying to do here? He didn't say anything like that. He was very understanding, and he said, but how do I rule the way you want me to rule when there's no law supporting that? And that's true. I mean, he has to follow precedent, and that's what people need to understand, that he's not being mean. He's not being unfair. He's following the law. And sometimes the law is outdated, and sometimes the law doesn't make sense, and sometimes the law is counterintuitive. But the judge has to follow the law, the precedent in that state. So I expected the judge to just outright deny it, but he didn't. He said, Elizabeth Massoff made her argument about how autism spectrum is a real disorder, that she talked about other states where it was reversed on appeal because the jury in the guilt phase was not told about the defendant's disorder. And she made an argument about how would the jury feel in this case if they found him guilty and then later learned that he, during the sentencing phase the sentencing phase, learned during mitigation that he had this autism spectrum disorder. Would the jury have ruled differently if they knew that? And so it's an argument. And rather than the judge just shutting her down, he actually said, I'll take a look at those cases, even though they're from out of state and they're persuasive, they're not controlling, but he's going to look at the cases and he's going to give a ruling. And this ruling will be interesting because on appeal, it could possibly make new law, or the legislature could take notice of it and make a statute regarding this issue with autism and how people present with autism. And the only challenge that I find in this whole situation regarding giving the jury an instruction about autism is that I personally, I've watched almost all the hearings, and Brian Kohberger has just sat there. You really can't tell because the camera's far away, but he hasn't done anything like what was argued in the papers, what the expert witness said about his stoic, expressionless face. And in all fairness, I guess it's hard to tell because you can't see his face, but I mean, he just sits there. He hasn't done anything out of the ordinary. So I think this is a very interesting issue. And again, Brian Kohberger is innocent until proven guilty, and that is the law, and that is what the jury will be instructed to presume. So this whole issue, I thought it would be shut down, but actually the judge was responsive. So I'm actually kind of interested to see the judge's written ruling. He's probably going to deny it because there's no precedent, but I would like to see what's called dicta, what he says outside of his ruling, if he says anything outside of his ruling. In other words, indicating that maybe in the future, something like this should be considered, or if he says anything else about this issue, because it's an important issue, and a lot of people who are in jail and who are wrongfully convicted may suffer from autism. And they may not have done the crime, but because of their disability, they're not able to articulate themselves properly to help their attorney, or to talk to the police, or to ask for an attorney. Although Brian Kohberger did ask for an attorney, but there's a lot of people who find themselves in situations that they're not guilty, but they don't know how to get out of them. And partly it's because of maybe they're on the autism spectrum. So there's a number of people that might be on the autism spectrum, and but for that, they would be able to work with their attorney. They would be able to communicate properly, react to what they need to react to make a decision about their case. And somehow they can't do it, and they end up in prison, and they're likely innocent, but because of their disability, they can't get out of this jam that they're in. And I hope that makes sense. And I'm not, I mean, by any means, the victims in this case need the person who committed this crime in jail. And if it's Brian Kohberger, then Brian Kohberger needs to be in prison. But if it's not Brian Kohberger, or if there are others who assisted Brian Kohberger, that's scary because they're still out there. And so I think this issue is very important, and that's why I'm making this video. But anyway, we'll see what Judge Hippler writes in his order about this issue. So look forward to that, and I'll see you guys on the next video.